Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with me, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's episode is former broadcaster, journalist, entrepreneur, educator, author, playwright, and Brown County Art Gallery Foundation board member, Lyn Letsinger-Miller. Join me now as I go on the aisle with Lynn. Welcome, Lynn. I'm so thrilled that you're sitting here in the podcast studio with me today. Boy, we have so much to talk about in terms of our history together, and well, let's get started. You know, I'm very sentimental, of course, and so when I see friends like you I've known for such a long time, the memories keep flooding back. So let's start. So as I do, I always like to go back and discuss history with friends who are guests on this show. So remind me about how we met, and let's share with the audience.
Well, it's really kind of funny because we sort of shared a similar path going on at the same time in like locations. I think we both had a history of Fort Wayne, which is where we both kind of started off growing up.
We sure did.
And I remember you mentioning that you first appeared on WKJG when you were 9 on the Bozo Show. And my first appearance on TV was at WRTV when I was in college on the Jim Gerard Show. I ended up back at KJG starting my broadcast career, and you ended up at Channel 6, and then I ended up coming to 6, and there we both were.
At the same time, when I started Channel 6, I was part-time talent, and then I got into a training program, and my first assignment was to be the gopher for the Jim Gerard Show. So, I mean, the intersection of our paths is really fascinating.
Well, and I think it's funny, here we are in our 70s, and we are still at it.
Yeah.
And we were there probably in our 20s. You were the first Latino, and I was the first woman, and I don't think they knew exactly what to do with us to begin with.
Well, we showed them, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
No, I'm very proud of, I don't know about you, I accept it with all due humility, but when people call me a trailblazer, I'm honored by that.
Absolutely.
But I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people, too, who didn't make it, worked hard so that someone like me could be where I am, and I'm sure that you can say the same, that you have people that helped you, right?
Definitely. Fort Wayne in particular gave me a chance to be on the air.
Well, here's another connection. Let's talk about this one, too. Hilliard Gates. Who is Hilliard Gates, for those who never heard of it?
Well, Hilliard Gates...
I have my story.
Hilliard Gates was the general manager of WKJG, but he was a sports legend. And really everything at that station revolved around something to do with sports. He was the voice of Indiana high school basketball. He did Indiana University.
He played himself in the movie Hoosiers.
Yes, he did. He did. He did. And so when I came to that station, we went from film to videotape. We had the first live truck in Fort Wayne, really to cover sports, but it was kind of an extra benefit for the newsroom. But it was really Dick Floria, who was the news director, that hired me, and he didn't tell anybody. And I was kind of a trial run to give me a story to do. And then that night on the news set, as Hilliard, who is the boss, sitting there ready to do sports, and Dick Floria introduces this story, and Hilliard just looks at him and said, "Who the hell's that?" And I kind of won him over, and eventually I ended up with a job and was there for 6 or 7 years.
Well, you did much better than I did, because here's my story. Okay, you recently saw that Patty Spitler did a story on yours truly about my career, and this didn't make it into the edit. But before I came to Channel 6, it was as a result of a Mexican-American mentor. His name is Jose Trevino, and he happened to be on an advisory committee, and his job was to make recommendations about minority programming and hiring. he was a businessman in Fort Wayne. He owned 4 or 5 Mexican restaurants, very successful. He was an immigrant from Mexico. In any case, he eventually helped me get to Channel 6, but before him, I tried in Fort Wayne to get started. And I don't know what I was doing. I was doing some sort of job just to, to make some funds until I could get a real job. I was really discouraged and depressed. One day, I thought to myself, well, a seed had been planted by someone I knew back in Washington, D.C. I lived there for a couple of years. I'm trying to really capsulize the story. So what happened was one day I was late for my job, and the boss sent me home to make an example of me to the other employees. So I was like really pissed. So I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to go around town and go to all the TV stations and put in an application. I was fearless, I was young enough that I had no clue, but it didn't matter. I was like single-minded. So I went to KGG, and miracles, he was there, and they let me see him because I asked for the general manager, and it was Hilliard Gates sitting behind that desk. And we talked for a while. He was very nice and very polite, but he said at the end, well, kid, I wish I could help you, but you don't have any training, no background in this. But I would say that you might try maybe going to a radio station, getting an entry level, maybe like sweep floors or something, and then work your way up through radio. And then maybe then you could go into television. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to do all that. I was like really a little arrogant. And then, of course, weeks later, I told my mentor about what I had done and what I hoped to do, and that's...
Opened the doors. Yeah.
But Hilliard Gates, he was a big deal.
He didn't know much, what to do with me either. I remember that they were paying me by this story. There was a guy there who was doing the early morning cut-ins on the Today Show. And he also was a photographer, so he went out with me, and he was always complaining about he, thought he was better than this, and he didn't want to be there. So I started agreeing with him. I said, you really should. You should go somewhere else. And so apparently it worked because he quit, and they gave me that job. Yes.
Guess what? When I got to Channel 6 and they finally put me in the control room, I did the cut-ins
Oh my
for the Today Show until they went to ABC.
Oh.
It's hilarious.
That is funny. Yeah, so I did that, and then I just worked my way up to the...
Talk about being intertwined.
Yeah. But Hilliard kind of stepped back, and he was kind of paternalistic about me, and he would get upset if I did a story that upset some of his friends at the country club, but they never stopped me. And Floria was brave.
So what was the level of sexism you had? Tell me about it.
It was a lot.
Did you get comments about your hair, your delivery, this, that?
Oh, all of that. And I know, it's funny, 2 weeks ago, I went up to Fort Wayne. I haven't been there for maybe 15 years or so. And I met with Floria. He's 88 years old.
Goodness.
We had dinner. We spent like 2 hours talking. He also hired my husband to be Leo Miller. That's where we met. So we've been together
I didn't know that
44 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we were kind of trading stories, and he talked about the nasty letters and phone calls that he got when I first appeared on the air, and he kept it all. He hid it all from me. He, protected me from hearing that. And I was living with two
What did they say in some of those nasty?
What's this girl doing on the air? She doesn't belong there. And, women don't belong on the air. And, just that sort of thing. And they were kind of giving me some soft hit stories.
Well, Barbara Walters was on NBC at the time. Wasn't she on NBC at the time?
She was. Well, and Jane Pauley was.
Yeah.
And a funny story about that. Some years later, after I was doing the cut-ins in the noon show and was doing a lot of reporting, and I was pretty well accepted now, and I got a letter from the president of NBC News, and he just said, I wanted you to know about a letter I received from one of your viewers recommending you to replace Barbara Walters. On the Today Show. And he goes, I just thought you would like to know that. And I still have this letter.
And
it was fun. But, and I learned a lot. But yes, I had to work twice as hard. I found out I was being paid way less than anybody else. And actually, it was the Indiana Brotherhood of Electrical Workers that stepped up for me, brought me into the union.
That sounds a lot like Barbara Walters' story, because there's a documentary on her right now.
Right. And when I went to Indianapolis, it was kind of the same thing, because I'd been a reporter and it covered a lot of stuff and had a lot of credentials. But there was a lot of extra scrutiny on us. I ended up eventually doing the 11 o'clock news, and the desk person was a woman, the director was a woman, the TD director was a woman, the floor director was a woman, the Chiron director was a woman, and we called it The News with Men, produced by women, because there were no women on the set other than reporters.
I didn't realize that.
But our ratings, we were like number one forever, and not just number one in news. We were like in the top 10 shows, period, during prime time. So they sort of had to start paying attention to us. I had great career in both places.
So what brought you to Indy? Remind me.
Well, the job,
of
a job. I'd been at 33 for probably 7 years or so, and it was just and
You
Leo
earned your wings for sure.
I did, and Leo
Paid your dues.
got a job in Indianapolis at Channel 6. And so we decided we were going to get married. I think I said to him, I'm not moving there to date you. So
where did you live in Fort Wayne? What part of town?
I lived in Canterbury Green Apartments north
where the campus now.
Right,
it's a big campus. I went to school there.
Right. Yeah. And the city has
IUP
changed. Just it's so different and beautiful, and it's exciting. And when I was in Fort Wayne, that's where I'd always had an interest in theater. Sure. And in high school, I was in choirs, and I took a drama class, and I had to try out for a play. I'd never thought about doing anything like that, and I got cast in it. And so I really enjoyed it. So when I got to Fort Wayne, I was able to explore two things that I really love, and that is art and theater. And there was a theater company there, Arena Dinner Theater. One of my roommates was active in that theater group. We'd go to see her in some shows. And completely unrelated, when I was in high school and college, I'd injured an ankle, and it was flaring up. And so I saw a doctor there in Fort Wayne, and they said, you need to have some kind of exercise that's not, tennis or skiing, something that can strengthen your ankle. So the idea came to take tap dancing lessons. And so the three of us signed up for tap dancing lessons with a guy named Charles Allen, who had a dance studio on Broadway in Fort Wayne. It was in a storefront with a wooden floor, and he had an upright piano. So the three of us, he called us Lynn, Jen, and Wynn, would go in with our Capezio tap shoes, and he would teach us tap. He'd pound on the piano. Well, it turns out he had danced in the Copacabana. He'd been on Broadway. He'd had this whole history of vaudeville. And so he is teaching us all this history of tap, as well as just the steps. If you ever took tap dancing, you learned the waltz clog, which is just a string of steps. And then you learned more complicated steps, and they all had names like Tag Annie and Falling Off a Log. And he said, so when you were in a tap chorus, the choreographer would just call out the steps. So you didn't really go down and learn a whole routine. He would just call out. And then the break was always the waltz clog. So he would yell, Tag Annie, and then you do it, and then he'd yell out, break, and you do the break. And so we were learning all this. And then he taught us buck dancing, which was also kind of like clogging. And those steps also had names. It was a much different kind of a step. We did this for like a year. Well, what was going on in the 70s in the theater world were revivals. And Arena Dinner Theater decided they wanted to do a musical revival of No, No, Nanette. And they needed a tap chorus. And it turns out that nobody in their 20s knew how to tap dance except for Lynn, Jen, and Wynn.
Well, I'll tell you what, Lynn, another connection, because Charles Allen, I went to Pitt, Purdue Indiana Theater.
Right.
That's where I studied theater for 3 years before I dropped out. And Charles Allen was our movement teacher. So
Oh.
I learned all that stuff from him.
Oh, my
Not
gosh.
to the extent that you did. He even taught us how to strip because it was all part of it.
Yeah.
It's movement. So,
Yeah.
So all the actors in the theater department took his class because it was a requirement. And the point being that if you took his movement class, it would free your body so that you could concentrate on your craft of acting and your character. You wouldn't be worrying about your body. It would
Right.
be loose and fluid.
Right.
And,
Oh, that's
and Charles, he was I don't think that people really. Well, he since then his history's been told.
Yeah.
And all of that you mentioned, it's in a way he was really kind of humble. He didn't really bring all that up unless
No.
you asked him. And I don't know if you ever made it over to his home.
No, we just were at this.
It was as eccentric as he was. He
Okay.
had art everywhere, wonderful art. But it was a mess. But he also had a huge giant python, and
Oh,
he would
no.
have people over to feed it. And he kept mouses in the refrigerator. And he would walk around Fort Wayne with his bell bottoms, and he
Yes.
like wore these like just hippie stuff. And he was long hair.
Oh, yes.
And back in
Long
the
beard
back
and-
in the early,
yep.
early or late '60s, he was and he was openly gay. He did
Yeah.
not care. He had no fear. He was a huge inspiration for a lot of us.
He
Just-
was. And it was
He's
exciting.
scary though too. He could be really.
Yeah,
intimidating.
he would discipline us if we had not practiced. But then what happened at Arena Dinner Theater became a whole string of revivals. So it was No No Nanette to Anything Goes to Pal
And then
Joey, and I was in all those choruses.
When you were working in Fort Wayne, were you then working when
Yes,
Larry Life was in charge?
Yes,
of
so
the
at
theater?
Pitt, yes, and
Because
then
my people had all moved on by then.
I knew him very well. Larry Wardlaw was kind of
course.
Mr. Dinner
And he
Theater
Larry was in
at the
my-
Civic Theater.
Oh wow!
Right. So, anyways, I just kind of, it all helped me really in television too, because just learning scripts. If you're doing a stand-up or a live shot, you have to learn to stand on your own feet.
Stage
And
presence.
yes, as some presence,
Performance.
right? And then often when you're on TV, you're MC different groups and to speak to different groups. So it all really
Do you remember
played in.
Maggie Silverman? She was a big actor star at the
Yes.
Civic Theater. She was my speech theater teacher, my speech class teacher. And so she was part of my education. We have so much in common. I knew that we had a lot, but I had no
I know, it's
idea
this much.
that it went this deep. That's so much fun.
Well, when I ended up at 6, I had the chance to kind of move away from some of the more hard news work. And I did a series of programs with Howard Caldwell on Howard's, Indiana. Not too long after I had started there in the early 80s, there was a movie about Frances Farmer starring Jessica Lange, and there was also a TV show about her. And I learned that she hosted the movie show every afternoon on Channel 6. And so Howard said, we need to do a series on this. And so that led to this whole exploration of her story in Indiana. And oddly enough, after Leo and I got married, we bought a cabin in Brown County, and that's where we were living. She had a cabin there and worked in a shop down there. And so as we began to look at her history at the station and how she came to Indianapolis, the station had kinescopes of her show. And if you don't know what that is, these are the days before videotape. So if they wanted to preserve a show, they filmed it. And so there were reels back in storage of her introducing the movies on this show. So we had her performance. We talked to the station manager who had hired her and did a lengthy interview with him on what it was like meeting her, because for him, his generation, she was a huge movie star. And just kind of the demons that followed her.
Her demon was alcoholism.
It was, but the movie portrayed a part that she'd had a
Sure.
lobotomy and other
no.
things. And so when we began to meet her friends in Brown County who had spent time with her, and her friends here in Indianapolis, they disputed that.
Did you meet Dizzy or Blickenstaff?
Yes.
Beezy.
Yes.
Beezy Blickenstaff. She was my friend, and her friend, Frances's friend, I think bought the house that she lived in. Or in
Eddie.
Sobro.
Okay. Yeah. I think,
over
yes.
near Broad Ripple.
Right.
And I worked with engineers. I inherited a lot of, when I got to Channel 6, I was still working with a lot of engineers who worked directly with her. And they told me so many stories about working with her. And then eventually became a movie that you just
Right.
discovered.
And the other funny part about that whole experience was we were trying to get movie clips of her actually in movies. And a lot of her movies had been done with MGM. And they had the worst rights. I mean, it was $3,600 a minute to use a clip. And so we were kind of frustrated with that. Well, I learned about a professor, and I think he was from Ball State, but he lived in Indianapolis, and there was this underground movie club. And these were all old movie buffs. And they would go around to theaters, like if they were closing, a lot of them had movie reels that had been sitting in racks for decades. And they would buy these films, and then they would meet at someone's house, and they had a film projector that could play these large millimeter films. They built up this collection, and so every week they'd get together and they would watch a movie. Well, they had a Frances Farmer movie, and an important one with Harold Hawks directing her. And so they let us dub it.
How did you end up getting to use it, though? Because of
well,
I mean,
we
even
just
though,
sort of did it. It wasn't and it wasn't MGM.
Yeah.
It was another studio.
you
So
know, things were a little loosey goosey back then.
well,
when
and it was
came-
local, and I
Yeah.
don't think, but it was not an MGM movie, but it was an
Yeah.
important movie that she was in, and so that really, helped us a lot
and
with
then
this.
your mention of Howard Caldwell again, God, more intersection in our careers because, of course, when I was there, Howard was the anchor when I first started with Howard was with Ken Beckley,
Right.
But Howard, God love him, he did projects with me, a documentary about Indiana jazz, and I mean, he really had an influence on me in terms of his love of the theater as well,
Right.
and music, and just the arts in general. He was a huge supporter. And he was one of the kindest people, though.
Definitely.
Remember how kind he was
Oh,
and
yes.
generous? And talk about humble. There's a guy was, always deflecting to you and that the team. And,
I can
he was
remember
remarkable,
when I
remarkable.
did the late news was at that time Howard and Clyde Lee, but every now and then you'd get a breaking story, something going on downtown or something, and your reporters were all out, and Howard would be like, "Well, just send me, I'll go," and so. There was like some big fire downtown, so I sent him down there. He wanted to go. He literally shut down the firefighting operation because it was like a movie star had walked, and it was sort of like, I can't send you because.
So you were around covering, because, okay, I don't know, what year did you start at 6?
In 1980, and I left in 1990. I was there 10 years.
left. Okay, so let's figure it out. And we were there together.
We
for
were,
a
because
while.
you had done a documentary on Tuckaway, and I
Yeah.
remember that it came out
That's
right
what
when
one-
I was starting.
There, I don't remember when I left. I left when I had been there for 14 years. I left when I was like 37. I'm 77 now.
Yeah,
so-
right.
Anyway, we certainly work with a lot of the same people.
Yeah.
Know a lot of the same people. But you're here because I love talking to broadcasters, and the reason being that the broadcasters I've had on the show also have deep ties with the arts.
Right.
And since the show is presumably I cover the performing arts, that's my quote, I created this niche, and I'm a reviewer. I'm also a performer, producer. I do all these things, but the arts are my life and my passion. So this is why I'm doing this podcast, in order to shine a light on artists and organizations and people in front of the curtain and behind the curtain. But there's so many ties that theater people have in common with filmmaking and television. So in a way, we're all kind of the same universe.
For sure.
News, entertainment. And you in particular, though, at this stage in your career, you're not only still involved with theater, you're now involved in the visual arts. And we reconnected, 3 or 4 years ago? Yeah. And I don't know how we reconnected, but we did. And I've been to visit. One of the reasons you're here is to talk about you're a playwright as well. And you are also with the Brown County Art Museum. So go to it. Tell us about your new career.
Well, it's actually, even when I was in Fort Wayne, I always had an interest in art. And when people were furnishing their apartments, they would go to some decorator store and buy something off the wall. And I would go to the Fort Wayne Art School and buy student work, because I liked the original arts.
No tchotchkes for you from...
No.
Yeah.
So when I got to Brown County, I learned about the history of this early colony of artists that had created an art colony and founded a gallery in 1926, this huge history. And it was part of a major regional art movement that took place across America. And these were kind of second generation Impressionist artists. They'd been influenced by the French Impressionist artists. They came, trained over there, came back to the United States, and they were looking for kind of their Giverny, their bucolic, place where they could be out in nature and paint in this Impressionist style. And Brown County became that location, one of those locations. And there were artists who were from Indiana that had trained in all the top art schools and had come back, and they began this art colony there. And it ended up in an art gallery in 1926. And I am the president of the Brown County Art Gallery Foundation, which owns that gallery, and we're coming up on our centennial. One of the things that happened when I learned about these artists, in addition to appreciating the work, was just what a great story this is. I mean, these super highly educated, trained artists moved to this county that doesn't have running water, doesn't have good roads. You have people living in abject poverty. And this culture clash when they arrive in the really in the late 1800s, they began to explore it, and then in the early 1900s, the train comes into Helmsburg, so now people have a way to get there. These were artists from the Art Institute, from the Art Students League, from the Cincinnati Art School. They'd studied in Paris and Germany, and they were finding this great subject matter down there. A lot of them were kind of midlife crisis. They were in their 50s. They'd been working in commercial art in Chicago. They wanted to break free of that. They wanted to really focus on fine art. One artist, Theodore Clement Steele, who was kind of a rock star in the art world, in his 50s, moves to Brown County with his new second young wife. His first wife had died. He meets someone considerably younger than her. They buy 60 acres in the wilderness, and they move down there and make a life for themselves. And it's really because they came, and his reputation, he'd appeared at the World's Fair in Chicago and in San Francisco. He was a jurist, just, very famous artist. Because he went there first, then other artists began looking into it. And one thing leads to the next, and pretty soon, by the 1920s, they have a fabulous location there, and they have other artists visiting who are moving there, and in 26 they create the Brown County Art Gallery. And so 2026 is the centennial of Steele's death and the centennial of the founding of the gallery. In fact, he died just a few months before the gallery opened, and they were very sad because he played such a role in that. So I kind of I left Channel 6, took a position at IU, a teaching position, mainly because we had a 5-year-old son, and I just needed a way.
School of Communications?
Well, it was the journalism school at that time.
Yeah, journalism, right.
So,
right.
But I had a lot of freedom then, and I started working for the Brown County Democrat, writing stories, little previews.
Boy, I bet you those students got a lot from what you
Oh, they did. I was there when Bob Knight was fired, yes. And
just your experience in television.
Oh, yeah,
was
definitely.
invaluable.
Oh, and we ended up, my husband and I had a production company at that time. We ended up being hired by the networks to cover the night. So I just took my kids with me,
Wow.
So, yeah, that was a lot of fun. But I began writing these stories. That led to a book that Indiana University
That's
Press.
right, you're an author, too.
That's right,
You're
The
an
Artists
author.
of Brown County.
Beautiful book.
And I'll brag, it's in its 4th printing.
I have my signed copy first edition.
So anyways, the idea came up. We were doing some events. I was good friends with the executive director of the Art Guild. and they would do a Renaissance year celebrating the colony. So I wrote a play about Marie Goth, who was one of the founders of the gallery, but also then at the Art Guild. She was a portrait artist, a woman artist, and it was really a love story about all of the artists who came there, the relationships they had with each other, which is basically what my book is. It's a great story that happens to have nice pictures. It's not an art book. It's really a history book. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of translated that into a one-act play with 3 scenes. At the time, there was a woman in Indianapolis named Sally Hager, and she was really well known in advertising. She played the flying nun in all these, I think it was St. Vincent's or hospital advertisements. And so she portrayed Marie at an event, and it kind of led to other portrayals in libraries and so forth. And the premise was the audience had come to Marie for a sitting. She was principally a portrait artist. She did a lot of florals, but she earned her money as doing portraits. And you're there for a sitting, and she's sitting there with an easel and a sketch pad, and she just begins to talk and talks to you about her life, and nothing gets done as far as the sketch. So you, the audience, learn this whole story of how she came there and what it was like. So now we flash forward to the centennial, and we decided to redo a couple of years ago the Marie Goth play. Now a new actress has emerged named Jill Tasker, and she was on Broadway. She was in the Wayans Brothers on television. Her husband was in a lot of the crimes shows that he played judges and so forth. He also was. They did a lot of acting, different festivals and so forth. And her mother became ill, and they ended up coming to Columbus to be with her mother and to take care of her. She also has a law degree from Boston University. She's an amazing person. And so she started getting back a little bit into her roots of doing some theater. So I approached her about this, redoing the Marie Goth play. And we did it. My gosh, it was a huge hit. We did it in conjunction with an exhibit at the gallery of Marie Goth's Circle of Friends. And it got a great review, and we ended up repeating it. So we're now doing the same thing, only it's with T.C. Steele's wife, Selma. And she's the young wife who moved to Brown County with him kind of on faith. And she had attended the Pratt School, so she had a background in design and was really trained to be a teacher to teach other art teachers. And so she was working in Indianapolis as a teacher. And Steele's daughter married her brother. And so through the family, T.C. and Selma met. And he was trying to find a remote area where he could, at the back end of his career, focus on painting. And he wanted it to be steeped in nature and free of complications, but yet accessible to markets and not too far from Indianapolis. So they decide that that would be their future. And so he comes down on the train, and she comes with him. The train is in Helmsburg, and she has written a memoir about all of this. And they take the train from Helmsburg, and she said they beat the horses the whole 7 miles, and it was terrifying. It was up and down hills, and the train actually was 7 miles from Nashville because Nashville didn't want that dirty train to come all the way in town. So everybody had to get from Helmsburg the 7 miles to Nashville. They stay in this boarding house. It's April. It hadn't been opened up all winter, and she steps in the room, and it's freezing cold. And the next day, they take a horse and buggy up to Belmont, Indiana, and up this hill to this property. And she's
that's a lot of great material.
Oh, my gosh.
So where are we now with this production?
Okay, so it's written, and it's to Jill. And we're going to open it up here soon with a major exhibition of art.
When is that?
It opens on October 4th. As part of this grand scheme of things,
where will it be?
It will be at the Brown County Art Gallery.
Okay, I've been there several times. I don't recall space. Where will you do it?
There's the art education studio, and we set it up very simply. We have an art education studio. We set up.
Is that where you show the Nancy Noel documentary?
Yes, in that space.
And that's the last time I was there, by
right,
the way. That
yes.
was incredible. That's a whole new show.
I know, another whole thing.
God.
Yeah, it'll be there in that space.
How long's the run?
Well, it kind of pairs with a larger exhibit. We decided, as we're looking at the centennial of the gallery and the centennial of Steele, where this all began, the place where it happened, was at the House of the Singing Winds, the T.C. Steele. That's really where it started. If they hadn't come there, there would have been no art gallery. There would have been no Nashville. So we're very closely tied with the Steele site. We do a lot of projects together. Right. We hold paint-outs out there at the gardens. And by the way, it is a treasure. The home is preserved, all of Selma's gardens. Selma takes this rugged place and over a period of time turns it into an art sanctuary while he painted. We decided if Selma and Theodore, she called him the painter. She always referred to him as the painter. So the name of the play is Selma and the Painter. Okay. If they could pick somebody to memorialize this other creation, this living, breathing, who would it be? We decided it would be Indianapolis famous artist Charles Warren Mundy, C.W. Mundy, and the premier still life artist in Indiana, and that would be Rita Spalding. And we approached them. How would you memorialize this site 100 years later? If Theodore and Selma were looking at it now, what would they see, and what is this legacy? And so they went down. They spent 3 years painting on the site. Wow. And multiple trips. Rita is the first artist allowed to be in the house painting since Steele died, so in 100 years. She went in there. She's doing still lifes of inside the house. She listened to the music that they played on their Victrola. She just took in, and then Mundy did the exteriors. But together they collaborated and said, we're going to paint this when it was at its zenith, which is in the 1920s, when thousands of people were coming there, when he was healthy and happy, and she had created these beautiful gardens with varieties of roses from France. And so that's what they did. So they painted, but like the fences that are around the gardens.
So this is going to be a part
so
of this.
There are 70 paintings that will be on exhibit, along with original steels of the House of the Singing Winds.
What you're talking about is something to promote.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, really, that's just so much.
And the play goes with it. So it opens on the 4th.
Who's directing it?
Well, me. But it's very simple. It's the premise now, similar to the other, is you're coming to buy honey.
Gotcha.
Steele died in 26. She lived there for 18 years. It had been so this play opens. It's been 18 years since he died. The Depression has happened. World War II is on the brink. The place is falling to wreck and ruin. Nobody's buying art. She's desperately trying to hang on to this property. She's trying to get somebody.
Like any good movie or film, you've got conflict in it.
Exactly.
It's not just all sort of like...
No, it's not. And so her memoirs were turned into a book called The House of the Singing Winds. It was also then partially written by one of Steele's grandsons and another art critic. If you read the book, it's based on her memoirs. There's a lot of resentment.
Yes. Wow.
And
I see a movie.
Oh, it is. I mean, so they
should contact Angela Pizzo.
It would be a movie. When the day they get married,
your neighbor.
She's not seen the house. He spent a year there building a house on this property. She's not seen it. So they get on the train, and it stops in Gosport, which was his hometown. And he says to her, "Oh, I grew up here. I'll show you around." And she said, out comes the sketch pad. She is in her wedding clothes, a dress from France and silk shoes. She turns around and he's gone. And so she's standing on the platform thinking, it's my wedding day and he's gone. And she has an epiphany that this is going to be her life. She will be secondary.
You know, it's clear to me that you're a hell of a storyteller.
Yeah, and well, that's,
no, I mean, it's your news background. It's all that you've done. You're a natural at this.
Yeah.
And I really can't wait to see what you've done with a dramatic piece. But I'm sure, based on what I just said, that it's got some real meat to it. It's not just fluff.
No, and it tells her story. Yeah. He's the one who got all the fame.
It seems like it's got all the elements.
Oh, it does.
So let's talk about this role that you have at this museum. I have been there, and it is stunning. Do you feel it's still a best-kept secret?
Oh, not anymore.
People don't even, there are so many stories, the Nancy Noel connection and
John
then
Mellencamp. Yeah,
Mellencamp,
we represent them both. So.
Yeah, I mean, people from Indianapolis, it's worth the trip to go up there to see the museum, have a dinner. There's so many wonderful restaurants. It's a wonderful day spent in Brown County.
Well,
just those
we also have a big education program there too. We really don't call ourselves a museum. We call ourselves the Historic Brown County Art Gallery. So there's 60 artists that exhibit there, your current artists. And then we have historic collections, and we do a lot of programs around the history. But we also do a lot of educational programs. And the biggest one that's been a real big hit is something called Make Art, Make Friends. And we started it 2 years ago for seniors, for people 55 and older, to break the loneliness from COVID. And it's 4 months, and it meets twice a week, now 3 days a week. We started it and we thought, we had a small grant from the Indiana Arts Commission. We thought we'll provide the instruction, we will provide food for lunch, and all of the art supplies. Because it's not really about being an artist, it's about finding companionship and friends.
And community,
we put something out on a Thursday, and by Monday, all 4 months were booked with waiting lists of 20. We really tapped a nerve.
Is Brown County attracting a lot of retirees?
Brown County is the oldest county demographically in Indiana. The average age is 63.
Wow,
so
boomers.
it's huge population.
I have friends who retired specifically to Bloomington because they did their due diligence.
Right,
because
right.
the cost of living, the university, and so same reasoning.
Exactly.
Nashville.
Right.
People want to settle into a community where they can find like-minded people.
And the nature, you can't discount that, the woods and the trails.
And they're willing to put up with the winters.
Right, and the winters aren't really that bad there anymore, especially now. Anyways, that art program, we also do the Mabel B. Anna Student Art Competition for 7 surrounding counties. For junior and senior high, 23 schools. We run it like a professional art exhibit. They exhibit their work. We have a judge that comes in, juries the work, and then we sell it for them. And then we have a huge reception and exhibit. And we do 4 weeks of art camp for kids.
I want to talk about Lyn Letsinger now. I want to talk about what makes you tick. I'm really interested. I think another thing we have in common, once a producer, always a producer.
Yeah.
When you're a producer, you can do just about anything.
Logistics and ideas.
No, really. No, the skill set that you develop, everything, every public relations,
right.
You name it.
Well, and when things go wrong, you always have plan B. We don't ever
you
stop.
Also have, when you're in the television business or filmmaking or theater, you learn it's being a visionary comes with the territory. You have to be able to see it.
And when you do a newscast, it's like a hungry mouth every day that has to be fed. So you have to be thinking all the time, well, what about a story on this or what about a story on that? Well, now it's like, well, what about an exhibit on this? Because there's a great story that goes with it.
And you also have to be decisive.
Yes.
Make a decision and stick with it.
Well, and you have to, in our case, we're a nonprofit, you have to raise money.
Yeah.
And
how is that? What in your broadcasting background? Because I fundraise too for my production company and other things that I do. But tell me what you learned in your background that prepared you for fundraising.
Telling them a good story.
Passion.
Yeah, passion. Yeah, definitely. It's easy to convince. We started doing exhibits about the early artists of that early colony. A lot of collectors out there that owned paintings. So we did this exhibit coming up as part of this history, something called Collector Showcase, where we would go to them and ask to borrow their art. And then we would put it on display and then charge them to see it. Yeah. And so we built up this core of collectors because it adds value to their art because it's being exhibited. People see pieces that they would never see because they're in private homes and are amazing. And then we build a story or something around that. And then we began adding contemporary artists to it, like with CW and Rita, we're adding artists who paint in that legacy. And so that has brought us donors and big donors. Sarah and John Lecklider, for example, and Bob and Barbara Stevens from Columbus have been huge supporters.
What's your philosophy in terms of fundraising? Like the idea that, for me, it's like I get joy out of bringing a donor together with a mission, and they fit.
Right.
Do you get joy out of that?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't have to convince. Once we started inviting them to show their work and we began telling them good stories, if you're a collector, you have a passion for it as well.
Sure.
And a lot of times, these are visionary people, too. My whole idea about owning early art is you really are not an owner, you're a curator.
Lynn, putting Monday together with Rita, that's inspired.
Well, but that was kind of a natural. It was Rita who suggested it because they had worked together for ages. We were going through the house. She had come to a few events. We're friends. And so we were in the house, and she's like, wow, there's like 1 million still lifes in here. And so we started talking with him. What could we do with this?
And I'm sitting here amazed that I know Rita from my 15 years in Irvington.
Right, and she's still there.
And I know C.W. Monday when he had a studio in Brown County.
Yes.
And he was a fraternity brother of Tom Cochran, my close friend.
Right.
And then recently 10 years ago, I produced a musical on Calder the Sculptor.
Right.
Calder the Musical, and C-Dub loaned me props for the show.
For the show, yeah.
A palette which he had paint put over, specifically, and an old piece of his. The audience didn't see it. And so I got to visit him in his studio and see some of his work at home. Oh, wow. I felt it was rarefied.
What they have created, for CW, this is kind of a legacy thing that he's really involved in. The work is amazing, and it's all for sale. The paintings they've created are for sale with part of the proceeds to support.
He did a trip to Europe a couple years ago.
Oh, it was quite a few years ago, but he was an illustrator, really, an illustrative artist for Bob Knight, for the PGA, for the NBA.
What's his latest content, or if you?
Well, it's this 3 years of the House of the Singing Winds, but he paints every day. He paints out at the East Coast. He paints California. He can turn out a painting in a day, jaw-dropping. Yeah. Rita is more intense. This is more old style. Take her 3 months to do a piece. I saw her show at your
gallery a few years back.
She's done university presents. She's done portraits of like Crystal DeHaan. She just finished one for
She's done electric boxes in Irvington.
She does amazing.
There's a pair of her somewhere, if I'm not mistaken.
At Keystone at the Crossing. She had work up there. Yeah, she's very well known in that genre, but this was a big challenge because she created a large body of work.
Is she national with her collectors?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They both are nationally recognized. That's why we're so gifted that they focused on this project.
And how did Mellencamp, I'm sure people would love that story. How did he find you, or vice versa, or how did you get to him? See, that's when you're a news producer, you're fearless. So you know how to track people down, right?
Well, that is a very funny story because somebody brought a Mellencamp painting in for us to sell. And it was a very well-known one of Johnny Cash. It was called El Paso. And it had been in a lot of exhibits, and it was a really well-known piece by him. And this guy had bought it at a gallery and had met Mellencamp. He was from Chicago. He was downsizing, so he brought it to us. Well, it is not the kind of art that typically sells from our gallery. And I thought, so I just put it in a vault, and I said, give me some time. Well, it turns out we have an art association member who was Mellencamp's costumer, and her husband was one of his engineers. And so I kind of reached out to her to say, what would he think about this painting? And so she goes, I don't know, Well, anyways, at the same time, I don't know, it was a few months later, a book came out that kind of traced, it was like a raisonné of his work, his career. And there was an exhibit at the Art Academy in New York. And there was a big poster and a lot of publicity about it. So I pulled some PR from this, and we took pictures of the book, and then we did a post, an email featuring the painting, and we put it out with the opening of this exhibit in the book and the painting. 15 minutes after we emailed, we got a call from London from a guy who's from Indiana, and he bought the painting on the spot.
I love it.
So when Mr. Mellencamp heard how quickly we sold that piece, he was interested in giving us pieces to sell, which we did. The Eskenazi Museum of Art at Indiana University then did a big exhibit of his work, and we matched with them and him to do a big exhibit. It was last fall at the gallery that corresponded with his exhibit at the Eskenazi.
Wow. Now that's a story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mentioned Angela Piso. That's that's on my to-do list to put you two together. No, really.
yeah.
And what is it that you want to do with him? Because he listens to the show, so he's been on this podcast.
Well, I just think the story of that whole art colony is kind of rich. One of the things I got involved in when I was teaching at IU and I was working at the Democrat, I got to know all the people in the police department. And there was a recluse who was living in a cabin between Nashville and Brown County. And he was found by the Meals on Wheels people unconscious and very ill. And they took him to the hospital, and he started talking about his little gems. And so the deputy sheriff gave me a call, and he knew that I was involved with the arts, and he goes, "What are those?" And I said, "Well, those are generally masterpieces, Renaissance artists' little pieces." And Arthur Humpel was this artist's name, had some in the house, he thought. So we went over there, and this cabin is falling down, the snow is coming through the cracks, and there are hundreds of paintings inside this house. Thus began a saga for me and for my partner in crime, Margaret Koglazier, who was an appraiser and at the Art Guild, of evaluating this collection, of finding the story of Arthur Humpel. And it became the news story of the year in Indiana, this recluse found. We got permission from the courts. We had to get a guardian for Arthur, and we could tie him to the early art colony. He knew Steele.
Wow.
He was kind of the last member.
Wow.
And the first show we did was at the art gallery as part of Collector's Showcase. I was not on the board then. I was the representative for Humpel, and Margaret was my expert. We had to clean up 20 paintings. We put them on exhibit, offered them for sale, and 750 people showed up that week, and they were lined up all the way down the street to get in to buy, and they were all gone in 20 minutes.
So what does this have to do with Piso?
Well, I think there's a movie there.
Okay. Well,
about this recluse. I actually have a novel half started.
Angelo, if you're listening, I am going to put you two together. But I need to move on here because we're almost out of time. I want to share with our listeners. By the way, Lynn and I, when I started this podcast a year and a half ago, I reached out to her for some advice. Next time you listen to the show, the script, my opening and the close, Lynn here helped me write that copy. So she actually had a part in developing my show, and she was my best critic. I asked her to give me feedback. And one of the things that you said, and we have to practice what we preach, or what you taught, is that, Tom, if you drop names, you got to tell your audience who these people are. Otherwise, they're going to think you're being an insider or it's an insider show. So Angelo Piso, for those who don't know who he is a filmmaker. He's famous for Hoosiers and Rudy. He just made a new independent film that hasn't been released, and he was on the show talking about it. He lives in Bloomington, Indiana. He chooses to live in Bloomington. He loves Bloomington. He loves what it has to offer culturally. And I would be surprised if he didn't already know about your museum, because he's really in tune with everything that goes on. But I don't know. It doesn't sound like it.
Well, I mean, I think people hear art museum and they think it's just art, but it's history. It's an amazing story.
He
what
really
happened
is a great Chamber of Commerce for Bloomington and a surrounding area. So in any case, I hope the two of you're both visionaries. And his movie, by the way, he chose Bloomington specifically and uses a lot of actors. A lot of them worked at Constellation. Do you know that theater?
Yes.
Yeah, all those folks. Bloomington really has been very special to me for my entire life. When I came to Indy, I had a really hard time adapting, but I found friends and community in Bloomington. So I
Yes.
would go down there a lot.
Yeah.
And finally someone said, Tom, you're never really going to live in Indies till you start putting roots there and getting to know people. So I started spending more time in Indy, and of course, people come and go in Bloomington. They go there for school, and then
Right.
they move on. But then there other people there get master's degree, and they become bartenders, and they never leave. But just the world comes to Bloomington, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, and it's just such a wonderful place to be a young person.
And tell people about
yeah.
your idyllic cabin, you and Leo. I mean, I've been there, and it truly is stunning. The views and everything.
Well, we had apartments up here. We were both working at Indianapolis, but we always had loved Brown County and used to go down there quite a bit. In fact, we were married there, and we decided we had opportunity to get 10 acres of land. And so, or not 10 acres, it was 5 acres. And we thought, well, we'd build a cabin. And so there was a builder down there who did antique log cabins, and that's what everybody kind of wanted. When the artists came to Brown County, the people lived in log cabins. There were 500 of them. And then when the colony began to develop, people would buy them and turn them into guest homes and then residences. And so that was kind of the feel that you wanted. So we had this ridgetop property, and then this builder found a cabin in Clay County, and it had been an inn, they think, from the size of the logs. And they brought the logs to the property. We had an architect design the house. The logs were cut probably in 1840.
Wow.
And so the design, kind of went around it. We have all the modern conveniences, but we live in this cabin, and it's full of the art that we've purchased over the years, because of our love of the art colony and of the artists who follow in that
And
legacy.
it's got the most dramatic fireplace.
Yes, it's a big fireplace.
Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun reminiscing, but hearing about this third act of yours, which is you're like me. There's no stopping you, right?
I mean, we're reminiscing, but we're also still very viable and engaged. And I think that's an important thing for everybody out there to hear.
Exactly. And my friend Patty Spittler, we often talk about why we love our work and that we should never let anybody define us. I see a lot of my contemporaries, I don't want to judge them, but I often worry about them because many of them seem to decline before their time because they become sedentary.
Right.
And so many talented people, too. We know a lot of people in broadcasting, and I wish they were still working because they have voices. And we need to stop being invisible, those people in our generation. Don't you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and I don't like being invisible.
Well, COVID was a seminal moment for me because I felt like our generation was being dismissed.
Exactly.
Oh, if they get sick and die, well, okay,
exactly.
And I always point out, especially in a county like Brown County, where you have such an older demographic, all of the board of directors of this gallery that I'm in charge of are all in their 60s and 70s.
Really?
All of the volunteers in Brown County
I love
are
that.
in that age group. And if you look at the Red Cross in these disaster zones,
No
who's
wonder
back
you're-
there cooking the food,
Well, no wonder you're doing so well. You've got a lot of intellectual property there.
Yeah.
Right? Experience. It's in
Exactly.
every single area, right?
Yes.
Wow.
We have lawyers, we have CPAs, we have brokers, we have doctors. We figure we have it all.
Hey, so tell our listeners how they can find you.
Well, you mentioned the gallery's popularity. The TripAdvisor did a survey of all the art galleries in Indiana, the top 15 art galleries, and we were number one, which I thought
Yay.
was pretty great. We have a very active social media platform, websites. It's www.browncountyartgallery.org. We're the historic Brown County Art Gallery on Facebook and Instagram. We have social media people that work for us, so we are doing very modern marketing techniques. For this show, the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Are you on TikTok?
I'm not, but we might be. This is not my wheelhouse. But the Visitors Bureau is marketing this exhibit in Cincinnati, Louisville, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, with streaming platforms, with videos, with reels, and all through technology that's kind of beyond me.
I'm thrilled to tell you and our listeners that my audience is widening nationwide because of what I have to offer in terms of national and local people. So there are people in Africa who are listening to
Oh,
the
my
show.
goodness.
So This is where what you're doing, the work that you're doing, would be of interest to anybody in the world.
Well, and we're open 7 days a week, and we don't charge any admission. We're free, and we put on museum-level shows. But we also have artists working, painting there. We have programming all the time.
Do you get worldwide visitors?
Oh, sure, yeah, and especially through Bloomington.
Of course.
You know, but yeah, the university people come. But the publicity we've gotten through Google and social media sites has helped us a lot. And there's always something new at the gallery. And people tell us that all the time. We come several times a year because every time we come, there's something new.
Well, I can't think of a better spokesperson, a former anchor and assignment. Were you an assignment editor too?
On
Or
a small
producer?
station, you're kind of everything.
Yeah, so you know how to get out there and get press. So here you are, and I'm so happy that you took the time to be here with me. And gosh,
I loved it, Tom.
I plan on being on the aisle at that play. You know,
Wonderful.
Because I can't wait to see how you've dramatized that story.
I'll put you on the reservation
Well,
list.
thanks again. So happy to have you here.
Thanks, Tom.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official newsletter for 15 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community. Thank you for joining me on the aisle. Please subscribe to my podcast, and if you want to hear previous episodes, find them on the All Indiana Podcast Network, or listen to them wherever you get your podcasts. This is Tom Alvarez.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.